So in this next session, we're going to hear about climate justice, inclusion, and a fair and just transition. And this topic is one of personal importance to me. And I want to tell you a little bit why. I am a journalist at Telemundo Network, and I have been a journalist for the past 19 years. And in my line of work, I have the opportunity to see firsthand the impacts of climate change. I have to visit the communities that have been devastated by storms, by hurricanes, by fires in California. And so this is my everyday life. And I realize more and more that the most impacted by climate change are the people that are the most vulnerable, the people that have the least, and the people that somehow have contributed the least to this problem. Women, children, the older generations, minorities, Latinos, African Americans, and Native communities. But at the same time, these groups and these people are of great potential, and they are an untapped potential, and they could be an amazing asset to this movement. The perfect example that comes to my mind is that a couple of years ago, I got to cover the impact of Hurricane Matthew in Haiti. And when we got to Port-au-Prince, we went to the communities that were affected, and we saw that these communities live in very, very small houses that they built themselves. Of course, when a hurricane category 5 hit the island, everything was erased. These communities didn't have the possibility to rebuild. Many of them could not go to a hospital because they didn't have the means. And this is what is happening over and over again. In Puerto Rico, almost 2 years ago, when Hurricane Maria hit the island as a category 5 storm, we also were there just a few hours after the storm passed. And we saw the great devastation that is caused by these monstrous storms. Today, almost 2 years after Hurricane Maria passed through the island, there are some people that are still living with a plastic rooftop in their houses because they don't have the means to rebuild. This is something that is happening not only in South America and Central America and other continents, but also in the United States. The people that have the least and the most vulnerable are the most impacted by climate change. But the good news about this is that these groups have an amazing potential. If we talk about Latinos, most of the Latino community are up to support legislation to protect our planet, even if this means paying more taxes. 85% of the Latino community believe that it's important that Congress act on climate change. When we talk about women, the latest stats from the United Nations says that 80% of the people impacted by climate change are women, and at the same time, women are the caregivers of the family. They are the ones that take care of the children, and they are the decision makers. So there is great potential of every decision that they take and have an amazing impact in the way that we live. When we talk about the Native communities, when we talk about Latinos, African Americans, we are deeply connected to the earth. We believe is definitely our mother, and we have to take care of it. So when we talk about the climate movements, we need to understand that we need to include everyone. Everyone needs to be sitting at the table of the negotiation. Everyone needs to have a voice, have a part in this important issue because there is too much at stake. So that is precisely the subject of our next panel. And I'm very glad to invite to the stage Ms. Jalonne White-Newsome. Jalonne is a senior program officer at the Kresge Foundation, responsible for the environmental programs grant portfolio on climate resilient and equitable water systems. Jalonne also leads the foundation works addressing the intersection of climate change and public health. So please welcome Jalonne for a very interesting panel.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. How are you feeling after lunch? Do we need to do some jumping jacks, or are you all right? Okay, awesome. Well, first of all, just want to appreciate the opportunity to represent Kresge, our environment program. We're a foundation based in Detroit, Michigan, and our mission is to advance opportunities for low-income communities in America's cities, but doing that in a way where we address racial inequities up front. And so I want to appreciate, first of all, the scholars that are here and ask them to stand if you are in the room that we were able to support to be here, because when we talk about inclusion, it's about not only being in the room, being at the table, as Vanessa said, but also creating the menu. So if we have scholars in here that were able to attend, just want to appreciate them. Thank you. And before I jump into this great panel, I want to appreciate the past panel because we should have started off with acknowledging the land that we're on. And so thank you for doing that. If we're here to talk about natural resources and people, we not only have to acknowledge the land that we're on, but all of the time and resources and folks that it took for us to be in this place. And so, I want to first start out by just reflecting on a little bit of my journey. And I guess when we think about addressing climate change, we cannot not think about justice. We cannot not think about inclusion. And we cannot not think about public health. And this is important. We're here to talk about breakthroughs, right? And when I think about breakthroughs over the 20 years that I've been in this space, there have been a couple of them. One is when I had the opportunity to be at the People's Climate March several years ago with my daughters, then 6 or 8 years old. And they turned to me and said, "Ma, it's not fair that we're able to live and breathe clean air and other kids aren't." That was a breakthrough for me. Another breakthrough happened when I was sitting in a bunch of rooms in DC as an environmental justice advocate and realizing that over time, there were community members that would come and talk to these agencies and leaders, and they were being just as valued and respected as the folks with a bunch of degrees behind their name, because it was important, and they had important experience and expertise that needed to be valued. That was a breakthrough. And it was a breakthrough for me when I was working with low-income seniors in the city of Detroit, and particularly with the city and trying to figure out how we were going to protect our seniors from extreme heat, and acknowledging that the city's services and infrastructure weren't enough, but that we needed to change. And the only way that we were going to make real change was making sure that the folks that were most impacted, those seniors that were most impacted, were a part of the solution. So again, as we talk about breakthroughs, as we talk about climate justice, inclusion, and addressing racial inequities, we gotta keep people first. And so our panel, I think, is gonna do that. These folks, again, and this is not an all-white male panel, so want to appreciate the racial and ethnic diversity of the panel. But again, want to start out by first doing some brief introductions, and we're going to shake it up a little bit. So we're going to have some quick flash talks by each of our panelists, but we want to leave a little bit more time for engagement and conversation, because I feel, and I think we all felt that there was some energy in the room, and y'all have questions, and we want to get this conversation started. So are you all okay with that? All right, awesome. So again, want to introduce to my left, Heidi Binko. She is the Executive Director of the Just Transition Fund. Previously, she served as the Associate Director of Special Climate Initiatives at the Rockefeller Family Foundation. So thank you, Heidi, for being here. Carlos Zegarra is a marine biologist whose dedication and passion for the environment was recognized with 2 Emmy Awards. He is the founder of Sascha Mama, I love that name, an organization that focuses specifically on environmental outreach in the Hispanic community in the US and Latin America. So thank you, Carlos. Ms. Danielle Deane-Ryan has more than 2 decades of multi-sector experience, leading innovation in clean energy, climate change, diversity, you name it, she's done it. Now she is currently the director of the Inclusive Clean Economy at the Nathan Cummins Foundation. So thank you, Danielle, for being here. And then Evan Weber, who you all just had the opportunity to hear, so probably doesn't need an introduction, but again, he is a climate justice advocate, originally from Hawaii, and again, one of the co-founders of the Sunrise Movement. So let's appreciate the panel. And Heidi, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. And Jalonne, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak today, and thanks to Eco America for having me on behalf of coal communities. So my name is Heidi Binko. I am the co-founder of the Just Transition Fund, and we work to help communities where coal plants or mines have closed across the country, and we're helping them transition to a new energy economy. In these places, we are really working to advance economic solutions that are equitable, inclusive, and low carbon. Equitable, meaning that everyone must benefit. Inclusive, that particularly those who are most affected, must be at the table. And low carbon, because obviously we recognize the urgency of climate change. This afternoon, I just want to say a few words about our approach and talk with you a little bit about why I think this work is important. What we do at the fund is really three things I'd like to emphasize. The first is that as we look out across the country, we focus our work in the communities that are the economically hardest hit with the most vulnerable populations. So that means that our work takes us from the coal fields in southern West Virginia all the way to tribal communities around the closure of the Navajo Generating Station or assisting the Crow in northern Cheyenne in Montana. Second point about our approach is that we truly believe that the most important thing that we can do is invest in community-driven solutions. These communities, the frontline communities that we work with, have the innovation, the solutions, the ideas. They have everything that they need to develop their own future. We're just really there to help them get started. And then the third element of our approach is the Just Transition Fund approaches this as a hybrid entity. And what that means is we both make grants and we provide technical assistance, meaning that in the case where communities do need access to specialized expertise, we find that and provide that for them. So just to make this work a little bit more concrete, because I'm asked this a lot, what does just transition look like on the ground? And fundamentally, in every place that we work, these are communities that are struggling with the question, if not coal, then what, right? What does our future economy look like? And it's different in different places depending on the context. So in eastern Kentucky, solar might be an option. In Wyoming, it's wind. Again, different in different places depending on the assets of a place. Finally, I just want to conclude with a couple comments about why this matters from a climate perspective. And I've seen this through our work throughout the country. It's so critical for us as a country right now to think and realize that if we're not investing in solutions and if we're not helping these communities create a viable economic future beyond coal, we're only building a significant amount of political resistance to clean energy solutions. That's the bottom line, and we've seen that play out in the last couple of years. So finally, just to conclude, before I turn it over to my colleagues, I want to leave you with two thoughts. The first is that frontline communities have to be at the center of solutions, of climate solutions. They are the people that are most affected. Second is that coal communities in particular have powered our country for over 100 years. They've sacrificed, their families have sacrificed. We cannot leave them behind as we think about this next new clean energy economy.
Awesome. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Well, my name is Zegarra. I'm one of the co-founders of Sascha Mama. For the ones that don't know, Sascha Mama is Quechua, and it means mother jungle. That's where I am originally from. I'm from Peru, from the Amazon rainforest region. And we're newcomers into this space. And the way that we approach this work, or the intention that we had, was to really inform our communities, but also to diversify the type of message and the type of work that was happening within the Latinx community in this movement. And there are different ways that we did this, but from the beginning we knew that one of the challenges that we had was communicating this information in a compelling way, in a way that it was relevant to our communities, in a way that they will see themselves reflected on the work that was taking place. And after some trial and error, we understood that our best work was based on our interest and the assets of the organization, was going to be within the cultural and the communications arena. And since then, we have been focusing really on engaging with communities on the ground, making sure that we create safe spaces for them to understand these issues that are culturally relevant, and that allow them or support them to really come forward with their stories, with their concerns, with their interests, with the challenges that they face. And for the last 4 years, the response has been amazing. We have been able to travel the nation, like 5 different states, connect with communities on the ground. We have built partnership with large Latino organizations as well as local ones, with large media networks to kind of, take this message out. And our findings are really not much different from what the polling has been telling us over kind of year after year, basically, that is that the Latinx communities care about the environment, that we care about conservation, that we are ready and willing to support, a clean energy economy. But the way that I read this polling, to me, it just means that we care about this, that it is part of our value system, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are ready to act on climate. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we have a great opportunity to ignite a community that is already, that already believes that this is happening, that already is in line to the work that we're doing. So our job here is to make sure that we provide the tools, the information, and the ecosystem necessary for those communities to rise up, right? And the way that we do that is sometimes is challenging because it doesn't necessarily reflect measurements that we are used to see in the environmental movement, which is basically based on results. We're talking about goals, metrics, KPIs, and all the things that are very important to the work that we do. But when we look at building diversity and inclusion into a movement, like the long-term work, we also need to look at other aspects of the work that are relevant to ensure that we engage them in the long term. And what I'm talking about is about 3 things, basically, and that's how we kind of see our work as a triangle. We have results, we have processes, and we have relationships. What I mean with processes is that how is it that we're doing this work? How is it being managed? How is it being monitored? And relationships is, what type of relationship we're building within our communities? How do we feel about each other? What is our trust levels? Because all these things matter. And sometimes results really don't tell the whole story. I could be hitting every goal, every KPI that I have set up, but I could run my team to the ground and my partnerships while doing it. So it is important, just to conclude, to kind of broader that spectrum in terms of what we think success looks like and what it means. Because our job is to really navigate between these dimensions of success, results, relationships, and processes, and to ensure that we pay attention to all of them to monitor our results.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thanks to America for having us, and great to be on a panel with old friends and new friends. My name's Danielle Deane, and as mentioned, I'm with the Nathan Cummings Foundation, and I help direct what's called the Inclusive Clean Economy Program. Just a quick question. How many people have heard of Steel Band or Steel Pan, or might like it? Who's heard of it? Great. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, land of the steel pan. And what a lot of people might not realize is those steel pans came from oil drums that were discarded that the workers were using. And so I got an education because our government took oil revenues and did a great job at investing it into education that was high quality and public education. But we also saw, as we celebrate oil and the things that came out of that oil, what it was doing to one of the most beautiful islands in the planet. If you haven't been to Trinidad and Tobago, put it on your bucket list. And so before I had fancy words that I learned later on, like sustainable development, the question for me then and today is, how do we figure out how we get the energy we need for the things we need, like education, without wrecking the places that we hold dear and that we love? And our approach at the Nathan Cummings Foundation is to make sure that we help fund not just work to support climate solutions, but the democracy efforts that will deliver us the political will to help that happen. And you might have seen recently that the Economist Intelligence Unit puts out a ranking of democracies every couple of years. And the US has now fallen and is now considered a flawed democracy. And our voting rates, we know, are abysmal, and that doesn't happen in places like Norway. In places like Norway, as some of you may have read, and they rank as one of the highest ones, and other countries like that. Just like something will show up saying, hey, your driver's license has to be renewed, or your taxes are due, here's your registration number. And here's your polling place, and no individual action is needed. And so we know that across the countries, we are seeing a lot of states trying to make the ability for citizens that are busy and stressed to make it very easy for them to vote. And so that's one of the things that, in addition to supporting just climate and economy, we help to support a full inclusion in our democracy. And I know for many of us, we're all very worried about any efforts to try to make our democracy less inclusive. Specifically when it comes to the clean energy and inclusion side, like Heidi and Jalonne and many others, we're supporting organizations on the ground that are really working to understand in detail when you have clean energy projects happening or when you're deciding on clean energy policies, what are the policies that you need to have, and what does the implementation look like to make sure that the jobs that we can get and the wealth building that we can get, how do we get those to the people that most need them? Just like we know trickle-down economics doesn't work, trickle-down jobs from the clean energy economy doesn't work. And so what we heard a lot of this morning is, hey, there can be all these great jobs. A couple of weeks ago, we released a report that the Brookings Foundation did, and that we supported, and it said, yay, clean energy jobs are here, yay, they're paying better, but it's mostly white male guys. And even though these jobs are ones that you don't necessarily need a college degree to have, you often do need training, and most people don't have the time to sit around and not earn wages while they're being trained. And so we support public policies that make it easier for people to get access to a lot of these jobs. The last thing I'll mention is one of my previous roles was with Green 2.0, and sadly, this was a little bit of a breakthrough, but the breakthrough that happened a few years ago is that a campaign that Jalonne and many others were involved with helped push foundations in the energy space and NGOs in the energy space to disclose what their diversity numbers were, not just overall, not at the intern level, but in their executive ranks and in their boards. And if you are a board member of an organization and you don't know what your number was, we don't just need to measure what matters when it comes to satellites and methane and carbon emissions. If we care about building a movement that is strong, that is multiracial, that is designing good policy, and that is not having any blind spots, and if we care about making sure that oil companies don't get away with looking like they care more about poor folks than we do because they can dismiss the visible environmental movement as opposed to the full movement as being white and elitist, then as a board member, you're not doing your due diligence. And so I just really want to encourage those folks, thank you, that are on these boards to pay attention to those measurements. With that, I'll turn it over to Evan.
Great, thanks, Danielle. Hey everyone, thanks for being here. Many of you probably heard me speak at lunch, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but my name is Evan Weber, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Sunrise Movement. I first wanted to say my colleague Varshni was supposed to be here instead of me, so if you're looking at your program and squinting, that doesn't look like Varshni, I apologize, but hopefully the B team will be all right. Like I said, I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but what I wanted to just say is that, for the purpose of this conversation, that the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal's breakthrough would not have been possible if we were not intentional about centering justice, equity, and inclusion in our work and in the Green New Deal. And so I just want to say a little bit about that. So first, the Sunrise Movement. We launched our movement just a little bit under 2 years ago, and we now have over 200 chapters around the country. And we launched with 11 guiding movement principles, one of which that helped to unite those chapters around the country. One of them is that we are young Americans of all walks of life. We're from the mountains, the coasts, and the plains. We're of many colors and creeds, and we find strength and unite across our differences in order to protect our shared home. Another one of our principles is that we stand with other movements for change, because we know that climate change requires massive government action at every level of our society. And the climate movement or the environmental movement cannot win that scale of change on its own. And so when it makes sense, we team up with other movements who share our values and unite to win political power and a governing agenda for society. So with Sunrise Movement, we've been very intentional about trying to uplift and uplift diverse voices that look like young Americans and Americans across the country. And that's been really helpful as we've gotten attention in having people from all diverse backgrounds really flock to our movement, not just the people who typically hear about climate change in their schools or in their colleges or private universities. And we've also been very intentional about the way that we recruit. So doing events at community colleges and low-income high schools, and reaching out to other organizations that work intentionally with communities of color to give them opportunities to join our movement, and not just join it, but also take on leadership positions within it. It hasn't always been perfect, just like this work never is, but that would not have allowed us to really blossom in the way that we have. And then with the Green New Deal, why it was able to really break through, I truly believe, is because the Green New Deal for the first time is a vision for action on climate change at a massive level that has been put into the halls of Congress, that speaks to the issues that affect the majority of working Americans in their everyday lives. Good jobs, clean air and water, public health, training, opportunity, economic prosperity. And these are not new ideas. Communities have been working, and particularly frontline communities and organizations working in the environmental and climate justice space have been talking about and building the work on these issues for a while. But the Green New Deal was the first time that a federal politician really talked about the issue at that scale and with the full suite of solutions that can actually build the coalition to make that scale of action a reality. So I'll close it at that.
Thank you, Evan. Goodness, I'm trying to look at our time, but I want to try and maybe get one quick question into all of you and then open it up for the audience. And so, Heidi, starting with you, we've heard a lot about clean jobs, clean energy jobs, green jobs. How does that translate to the communities that you're working in? Is that the real story that we're hearing, or how do you see that?
That's a great question, and probably one of my biggest pet peeves. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about this. Our country is creating a lot of new clean energy jobs, which is fantastic. I was actually just at a climate and energy conference in California a couple of weeks ago, where a person from California stood up and said, "Hey, we've got so many more clean energy jobs than we have coal jobs." And I thought, well, that's great. That's great for you, but it's not so great for people in coal country, because what is happening in effect is the places where we are creating those clean energy jobs, and Danielle alluded to this, is not in the places where we're losing coal jobs. So who are those jobs for, right? And that really matters, right? The displacement is not equal at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Heidi. And then Carlos, you spoke a lot to values, and I appreciate when you're saying part of the value system, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are ready to act. And I'm just thinking about, like, what advice do you have for the folks in this audience to really work with communities that they may not have worked with before? Thinking about the cultural piece that you talked about, the importance of values, and especially if you don't come from a particular community, what would you suggest as we talk about solutions and building this inclusive, climate-just economy? What do you suggest for folks?
Yes. Well, when I think about approaching kind of frontline communities and minorities, and that is my personal take, I feel sometimes we kind of overcomplicate things because ultimately it's about people. It's about relationships. So it's about us individually. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how is that we are showing up to this work. Because in reality, what I think we should do when we approach these new groups or front lines, whatever the case might be, is that we need to kind of do a self-scan of ourselves to see, how are we really listening to these groups? How are we showing up to the work? How are we, what kind of baggage we're bringing to those conversations in terms of mental models, in terms of attitudes, behaviors, because ultimately, that's what creates diversity. And our goal is to really come to those spaces as open and as neutral as possible, to really be able to see each other, to respect each other, to understand, each other. So that is one thing that I think we all should be doing before we start those conversations, kind of take a step inside before we take a step forward. And the other thing that I think it is important is to have kind of like a student approach to these conversations, kind of stepping into the space with a glass half full, understanding that we don't hold all the answers, understanding that or willing to learn as much as we can, because ultimately that's what is going to move the conversation forward. And understanding that the fact that maybe the other person doesn't share our same values or our concerns, or maybe is not able to articulate this conversation in a way that we do, doesn't mean that they know less about this. It just means that their knowledge is different. And in that sense, so much important to the conversation. So those are things that I quickly kind of check myself on before we have those approaches. And it just works. It works as long as, because you could take it as high as you want or make it as complex as you want, but like I say, ultimately it's about you connecting to the other person. So.
Awesome, thank you. And Danielle, so the world of philanthropy is not perfect. And sometimes we can come into places and make situations worse than what they were. And so at your foundation now, what are you doing, I guess, to really make sure that it's not extractive, that we're actually building an inclusive economy, holding ourselves accountable in some ways? Can you give an example of how you're innovating in your position now?
Thank you very much. One of the things that our foundation makes sure to do in terms of process is to make sure that as we're developing strategies, we are hearing not just from, quote unquote, the grass tops and the scientists, but that we're also hearing from those that are closest to the problem. And so many of you know that EJ leaders often have a phrase, nothing about us without us. So we last year, for instance, we're hearing from the field that organizations needed a lot of communication support. And one of the things we did is had a series of 2 or 3 convenings with those partners and asked them what was working, what was not working, what the scale of the funding was that they needed, et cetera. No one foundation can do anything at scale on their own, and we're not just looking for progress here, we're looking for breakthroughs. This is the theme of this conference. And so we partnered with other foundations to do it as well. That might seem like common sense, but it doesn't often happen enough. And usually it ends up producing a relationship that is more real despite the imbalances in power. But one of the things we heard from them loud and clear is this disparity that's happening in the movement, where the organizations that are most visible and well-funded have the most diversity problems, and there are some that are making changes and trying to do better. And the organizations that are closest to the problem, led more by leaders of color, who are the strongest supporters in the polls for climate action, that needs to change. So part of what we've been doing in our own sector is trying to make sure that we keep that conversation highly visible and partnering with others to try to change that dynamic a bit. What that looks like in terms of the policies we support, as an example, is many of you may know, to give a good news story, that the California Air Resources Board last year said to all the metro agencies in California, you have to go all electric on your buses by, and I'm going to forget the year, maybe it was 2030 or 2040, I forget which one. But either way, amazing goal. And what you saw in the old days with many foundations was, yay, win, we can talk about what climate emissions, carbon emissions are going to drop. What we saw from the California Resources Board last year is that now written into that language is, and you have to make sure that if you are trying to sell us buses that we're going to invest all our tax dollars into, that you have to have standards around wage quality and benefits and jobs and other things in there. So again, you measure what matters and you work it in, rather than somehow, which is what we've seen in some areas of the foundation world, dealing with equity issues as mission drift. It is central, and if we are to build the power that we need, and Evan and they are working on that kind of integration, those are the policies that we need, and it happened because of the groups like Jobs to Move America and others, People's Action, the NAACP and its branches that are working to make sure that the voices of those most affected, that they have the support and bandwidth to engage and to be at the table.
Awesome, thank you. And so get your questions ready. I have one more quick question for you, Evan. So when I think about intergenerational equity, and the fact I get excited, kids excite me, they give me hope. That's the reason that I'm still in this game. But how do we make sure that we still respect the wisdom, the movement builders, the elders that have been doing a New Deal for much longer time? How do you make sure that you integrate in that knowledge and wisdom into this new movement? And I can say youth because I feel old now, into youth and young folks. How are you making sure that there's some intergenerational equity there in this line of work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, one that we think about a lot. I think, we launched Sunrise as a movement of young people, one, because all the founders were young people. We're all in our early 20s. And yeah, we looked around and we kind of saw that the kind of movement that we wanted to build, older folks weren't building it. And so we said, let's build something new. And that doesn't mean that older folks weren't doing really good and important work, but it wasn't exactly what we wanted to do and what we thought was necessary. So we, so the other reason that we built our movement with young people specifically was because we know that young people can be an incredibly important moral voice and messenger for this issue, just like faith communities can be, just like elderly community can be, just like all sorts of folks, and we wanted to help to carry that moral message. And also when we look throughout history at mass popular social movements, it was often young people that were at the forefront of making incredible sacrifice and commitment that helped to lead those fights. But I think some of the last 6 months have been pretty crazy for me, and some of the hardest moments have been when I felt like I've been just really lost. Because the double-edged sword of being a movement of young people is that you don't have a lot of people who have gone through challenges that you're going through before, and that everybody's kind of figuring it out together and doing things for the first time. And the most comforting moments that I've had have been when I've been able to lead lean on my elders and get support from people in the movement that have been doing this work for years and generations. And yeah, we definitely need that a lot more. So thanks for asking the question.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so we want questions. Okay, your hand went up real quick. Okay, so the young man in the suit, and then I saw a couple up there, and then one here. Okay, I don't see anybody here, I'm not leaving you out. And then the one up top. Okay, and can you state your name and organization?
I'm Reverend Michael Malcolm, People's Justice Council, Alabama Interfaith Dialogue Life. I'm also one of the scholarship winners. I'm wondering why it is that we aren't sitting up there on the stage and telling you all about our stories, because when I've applied for foundations, you all have rejected us, rejected me. Yet, you telling me that you want to do this for leaders. My issue in what I'm hearing is, I'm hearing from you, but I don't feel like I'm being heard.
Okay. Is that a question for me?
I wasn't making a question, I'm sorry, I was making a statement.
A statement.
I guess if I did want to make a question, how can we change the perspective or the perception so that we can actually feel as if though the grassroots are being heard in spaces like this?
So I'm definitely not going to pretend, and I might have some other folks that want to answer that, things are done in a perfect way. Which again, I come from a place where I know the value of voices, and it should be panels full of folks that are representative of the communities that they come from, that are able to speak truth to power. And I think that's something that we need to change, and the onus is on us. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think as we go to conferences like this and others, that we not only need to change the makeup of folks in the audience, but make sure that our panels are representative of community voices. Because again, I admit that. And again, that one way is to make sure, and my conversation with many organizations that we fund is, whether we have panels or whatever, I try and make an effort to make sure that my grantee partners are speaking. But again, it's not perfect, but I'm trying. But I don't know if other folks want to comment on that or not.
I'd actually like to comment. Thank you so much for your question. I came here today, and this is the first time that I've ever been at an American Climate Leadership Summit, and so I wasn't sure what to expect. And I'm always happy to talk about our work at the fund, because I'm so excited about all the communities that we represent and we work with. And I was just struck sitting in the audience today, listening to panel after panel with very little diversity, with people speaking to us, not being of us. And this is just a very small way that I'm going to change, but I really want to address your question. I actually don't know that I'm going to accept speaking engagements anymore. And the next time I get asked to do something like this, I have at least 30 amazing people that I could put forward. And to be honest with you, I didn't even think about it for this, for this event, but believe me, I thought about it today, and it's just a small way that I'm going to change. Thank you.
One of the things I would add on that front is something that I alluded to earlier. The boards and the senior staff of the foundation sector, especially on clean energy, it's not a very diverse group. And I've been on both sides of trying to fundraise and on here, and the number of, especially since we are known for focusing on groups most led by people of color, and that focus on equity, the number of grant requests we get compared to what we can fund, if we want to give everybody more than just $2,000, which isn't going to help in a significant way, the scale is just outrageous. And so it really is a major problem, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge that. And I would also say, as we, this morning, Heidi and I were texting back, was really weird it felt, because I was here a couple of years ago and it was a lot more interactive and the panels were more diverse, and sometimes you don't realize until you get to a conference sort of what's happening. So Bob, we're gonna find each other and talk, because we're here to help. But one of the things I will say for any individual going on a panel, I looked at this panel and I thought, what an awesome, diverse panel. I presumed they were all going to be like that. And I should have asked more questions. And I think for anyone that's going to be on a panel, to ask what's the diversity and the range of opinions on the panel is going to be important. But I want to acknowledge we're not going to win this climate fight without significantly more resources at a breakthrough level going to organizations like yours. Maybe we can take 2 at a time, 3 at a time.
You want to take a couple questions? So maybe we'll have one question up there, and then I think it was one down here, and you waving in the middle. Okay, so if you could just speak your questions, and then we'll have the panel address them.
Mm-hmm.
In communities, that are not necessarily coal communities. No, disrespect to coal. Or when it comes to our brown brothers and sisters, are we all looking to work together with both older and new organizations?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think
Alden Meyer, Union of Concerned Scientists, also. We know we're up against some very powerful forces that want to block climate action and are trying to divide us. And there are some tensions, I think, in our constituencies. For example, the AFL-CIO letter on the Green New Deal, or some of the concerns environmental justice communities have with carbon pricing, or the concern workers have about companies like Tesla and Solar City resisting unionization and paying non-middle class wages. How do we overcome these divisions and unify across constituencies? Are there conversations going on? What should we be doing to make sure that we come up with a platform that we can all stand behind? Because we know those who want to block action will be looking every which way to try to divide us and pit us against each other.
Okay. I think it was one more, and I know we.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Ross, neighborhood leader from Charlotte, North Carolina. If any of you up there could probably address the utilization of community benefit agreements in addressing climate change.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. So, just Megan, I'm just checking. Do we have how much time?
0.
I'm asking for some. Can we have 5 more minutes? Okay. So 3 questions in 5 minutes. So we got utilization of community benefits agreement, and the conversation doesn't have to stop here, but at least to give an initial feedback. Alden's question about how do we overcome divisions across constituencies, and then Adrian's question, what are organizations doing to get folks together? So
I'll take a
okay.
say on it. So in regards to how we are working to bring different groups together into the same space, I believe we need to take a cultural approach to this work. The way that we do that is that we make community events, really. So we not only want to bring the youth, but we want to greet their parents. We want to bring their kids. And for that, we need to set in place certain things so we appeal to everyone. So if you look at the events that we do nationwide, we always partner with our local organizations. So our intention there is really to kind of further the work that we are all doing together, but we also make sure that we get into place different activities that are appealing to all the different age groups, meaning we provide childcare right on the spot, and we have activities specifically for the kids, meaning we have activities that are appealing to youth in terms of learning exercises. We have activities that are more informative for people that are older. And that is, to us, I believe, is the way to not do this work, but it's also challenging. Because like I was saying at the beginning, this type of work, sometimes it is difficult to measure in terms of what we're doing. So it is challenging to find the funding that allow us to do that, but I think we need to invest more and more in this type of work where we have an agenda that is able to measure processes, relationships, and specific results in order to be effectively. And one of the things that we notice is that the more groups that we bring into the space, the more diverse the conversations are. And that is great, but it's also challenging. And when I talk to these groups, I always put on the table that we do not necessarily need to agree on every aspect of what we're working on. But we could agree on certain things and intentionally work to build on those. Because if we try to get agreements on multiple things, it's going to be, the work is going to be delayed. So just kind of focus on what are some of the things, the commonalities that we have between the groups, and just craft your work around those.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. To your question as well, Adrian, I mean, I think I can speak to what we're doing specifically. To Carlos's point, relationships, I think, are really the key to all of this. And so while we're working to build critical mass, we also need to create critical connections that can help guide across these different groups. And Sunrise Movement and young people are not going to win a Green New Deal on our own. And so right now we're working to help set up coordination tables and connections across different constituency groups. Farmers and ranchers for a Green New Deal, the Gulf South for a Green New Deal, scientists for a Green New Deal, and indigenous communities for a Green New Deal, labor for a Green New Deal, and much more. And then begin to build relationships across those constituencies to keep moving forward the work. And then internally, we're also encouraging all of our leadership to seek intentional mentorship from elders who can, help guide us through this work.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Adrian, for your question. We always hear at the fund that relationships are infrastructure, and so that's sort of a starting point for us, and we fund a lot of learning exchanges between communities. We're working on one coming up between Navajo and Appalachian groups so that they can learn from each other, right, young and old in the mix. We also believe that there is a tremendous amount to learn from other communities that have undergone other types of economic transition, right? So if you look at the timber wars, you look at the base closures, you look at steel, tobacco, right? It's not just, our country has had we've had a long history with these different types of economic adjustment programs. So we do a lot of learning there. And then, finally, I'll just say, because, you mentioned this about our focus on coal, and I get asked this question a lot, why focus just on coal? And there's such a tremendous amount of work to be done in this country immediately today on coal, and the natural gas and the oil industry are in a different place. And so we really decided to start here because communities were so economically distressed and so strapped, knowing that we were going to learn a lot of really valuable lessons that we could then apply out. But we're still bringing all those people into our conversations.
I would just say really quickly, community benefits agreements are key. One of a good organization to look at is Jobs to Move America, and they help make sure that a bus factory that was making clean electric buses had a community benefits agreement. And there's a great article in Forbes called "Fare on the Factory Floor is Bad for Business." They were getting better buses now that don't break down as much and don't have as many problems because of the community benefits agreement that makes sure that the community is just invested in making sure that what's coming out of that factory factory is solid and high quality, as opposed to just trying to get through another day and worried that you're going to get fired tomorrow. I'll make sure they're legally enforceable.
Well, I'm getting the hook, so thank you all.